Jack, start off by just telling us what you found.
Well, this is the fourth year and going into the second term of the Obama administration, and every year the Associated Press takes a census of not only the requests that the public has asked for, and as you mentioned, it's the largest, about more than 600,000 that they had processed last year, but also how well they're doing with it. And on one hand, while the government gets exactly 9 different exemptions under the law that they can redact things, whether it's for national security or law enforcement or internal deliberative processes. There's also ways that they have released records, either in what we call in full or in part. So they'll black it out with that sort of infamous black marker that you see. We call it like a redaction, or they just won't give you over the records. And a couple of interesting things we found this time around was that, particularly with the Defense Department and the CIA, there was an uptick in the number of times that the administration had cited it's called B1 in FOIA terms. It's Exemption 1. It's a national security exemption. The CIA increased by 10 percentage points. The Defense Department had done it about 1,000 more times, even though they had received fewer requests. And it's sort of a benchmark at the end of Obama's first term. This is the same president, as we all remember, who the second day in office had sent a memo to his executive branch agency heads and said, look, this is the FOIA, this is the public's right to know, their signature right to know law from 1967. In the face of doubt, openness prevails. And what we found is it's a challenge sometimes for the administration, particularly with current events, how they balance security with releasing documents to the public.
We're also joined in New York by Alexander Abdo, staff attorney at the National Security Project of the American Civil Liberties Union. Can you talk about the significance of what Jack Gillum found at AP?
Sure. I think the numbers tell a very compelling story, particularly given that this administration came into power in 2009, promising a new era of transparency. But perhaps even more important than the fact that claims of national security are on the rise is the type of information that the government is trying to keep secret. The Obama administration has dramatically increased claims to keep secret law, so its understanding of its legal authority. We've seen, for example, the government refuse to disclose the legal basis upon which it can kill U.S. citizens abroad. We've seen it refuse to disclose basic understandings and interpretations of its dramatically expanded surveillance authority since September 11, 2001. And so as corrosive as secrecy is generally to our democracy, I think particularly corrosive is the type of secrecy we've seen under the Obama administration.
You mentioned the memos on drone killings. What are some of the other key documents that you think the public should be able to see?
Well, for 2 years now, a handful of senators and congressmen have been sounding the alarm bells about secret interpretations of the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act, as you know, expanded the government's ability to conduct surveillance of Americans' communications, and there have been secret interpretations of that law that senators have been warning us for a couple of years would shock ordinary Americans. I think that's a particularly troubling development. It's one that we still have very little clarity on from the administration or from anyone in government. And there are similar surveillance programs that we know very little about. In the drone context, secrecy is concerning because people are being killed. But at the same time, it's hard to hide the fact that people are being killed. And so at some point, the government, I think, will be forced to do the right thing, either by courts, by Congress, or the public. With surveillance, I'm particularly troubled because the harm is often intangible. People's communications are swept up in a massive dragnet. The NSA keeps those communications for years in enormous databases with very little transparency about what's going on, and very little opportunity for Americans to comment on what's going on because they just don't know.
Jack Gillum, can you talk about the number of requests that are going to the National Security Agency about warrantless wiretapping?
Sure. Well, we don't. That's the thing about when things are secret, is we don't really know the full extent of what they ask for. In fact, about half of the 2,300 or so exemptions that the Pentagon cited and stamped national security on came from the NSA, which was an increase over last year. And what this sort of creates for, I mean, like I said, the government has this delicate balance to do at times between what a requester, say, a news organization or a member of the public. I mean, this is after all Sunshine Week, when that sort of year in March when news organizations and nonprofits, celebrate openness in government and file FOIA requests. where they have to balance that with, hey, look, is this legitimate national security? And, we don't know what we don't know in some cases, which, some might call disturbing. Some might say, well, hey, look, maybe people are asking for more information about drone strikes. Maybe they're asking for proprietary information of the NSA, which is a very secretive organization in Fort Meade, Maryland, and in some ways has to be. But that increase at the same time, sort of some of the people that we talk to, seems to run counter, at least on its face, with this sort of new pledge of openness and transparency in government. And there's that third way that a lot of times people don't really realize in public records request, where it's called segregability, where you can, just because a record may be exempt or information in it may not be releasable, they can black out some of it and give you the rest of it. There have been, cases across the government this year, like there have been in many years, where the entire document is in fact removed from disclosure, or where they'll go so far sometimes to not either confirm or deny that such a record exists.
Jack,
so it's just this balancing act.
What most surprised you in this report?
I think there is sort of a mixed bag what surprised me. I think the increase in national security exemptions was one. There's another one, it's called Exemption 5, and it's this deliberative process, sort of the internal discussions, attorney-client work product of the administration went up to about 60 or so thousand, an increase, sort of a market increase in the last couple of years. This is after the administration had said in its first year in office, hey, look, agencies, you can't really use this, this exemption as a catch-all because you don't want to release records. We saw an increase in there. We also saw a couple of things where not just what the records are being withheld, but that it took a little longer to get those records back to the public. I mean, the most, I guess, remarkable thing we found is at the State Department, where requests were asked for expeditiously, which is a provision under the Freedom of Information Act, that if somebody's life is in danger, or for a news organization, if you're covering a breaking story, on average, and that's an average, those records got back to the public within 2 years.